Welcome to CapitolView, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on CapitolView is Sarah Mansur, State House reporter for Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, and it is her first time here on CapitolView. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Also, Charlie Wheeler, Professor Emeritus from the University of Illinois Springfield, former head of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the university, and former State House reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Welcome back, Charlie.
Thank you.
Great. Hey, lots going on this week. In some sense, Illinois is opening up again. We are moving in just a couple days from stage to another stage where larger gatherings will be allowed than are presently allowed. Folks can return to indoor dining at bars and restaurants. However, as this is happening, the national trend is not good. We're seeing a surge in cases in other states that has prompted concern about how well we have this virus under control. This week, Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration issued guidelines for reopening schools, which did not necessarily meet with widespread approval from folks who work in schools. At the same time, the governor is being sued by the Republicans saying, "You're telling us what to do too much." What are we to make of this, Charlie? On the one hand, we have the Republicans dragging the governor into court. On the other hand, we have some folks from the educational sphere of things saying he's not being specific enough. Should we be surprised, and where do we go from here?
Well, the thing that strikes me is that for all the complaints that people have about Governor Pritzker keeping us cooped up and everything, you look at the numbers. In Illinois, the numbers of hospitalizations are going down. We've been basically protecting ourselves because of the things that the public, the general citizens of Illinois, have been willing to do. Social distancing, wearing face masks in public. Now, on the other hand, you look at the alarming rates of the growth of these infections and hospitalizations and deaths in some of the states that I guess wanted to prove that wearing face masks is a liberal ploy, or that is all some hoax cooked up by the Chinese communists.
Yeah, can you
see
Florida
places like Texas and Florida, Arizona, where the numbers are going through the roof.
Right.
And overall, the nation itself is in such a state that when the European Union opens up its borders for its member states, it's not going to allow Illinois, and I should say it's not going to allow United States citizens to come in unless they're willing to quarantine themselves, because as a whole, the nation has done such a lousy job of trying to beat back this. And there's a measurement that's put out and analyzed every day that reflects something called the R factor. How likely is it that someone who is infected is going to infect somebody else? Anything less than 1 is good. Illinois is tied for 5th lowest with 0.8. Some of the other states are up there near 1.5. Places like Texas or places like Florida that have not taken this as seriously.
Yeah, I mean, and this is turning into, or has turned in to some extent, I think, a generational divide or a pre-existing divide. Charlie, no offense, your beard is wider than mine. You are those amongst those who might be at higher risk should you get infected. I'm asthmatic. I also am perhaps in that group. Sarah, which brings us to you. I don't mean to put you on the spot here too much, but what I'm wondering is, as this progresses, and these court actions are in place, the schools, for example, the teachers' unions are saying, this is all over the map. The guidance that the governor has given us could mean anything that we have to go to classrooms to we can continue with remote learning. Is it unreasonable to expect that, given what we know now, it's too soon to say what might happen come what's supposed to be the beginning of the school year?
Yeah, I do think that's fair to say that we don't know what's going to happen especially with the virus, whether there will be, a resurgence in the fall that would make it even more, dangerous for in-person learning at schools that has been announced by the governor. As to pick up with what Charlie was saying. I believe governors in New York and Connecticut, New Jersey are requiring certain travelers from Florida and other states where cases have increased to quarantine for 2 weeks. I don't know whether Governor Pritzker will do something similar, but obviously that trend of increasing cases adds to the uncertainty of what might happen in the fall and what schools and K-12 and community colleges and universities will be comfortable doing. I know one thing I've been writing about is the bar exam, whether lawyers or new law school graduates will be able to sit for that, and whether that will be safe. There are some jurisdictions that have asked students to sign a waiver acknowledging that the risk is so high that they accept the possible risk of death if they sit for the bar exam. So a lot of uncertainty, I think.
Yeah. I mean, universities have suspended, standardized testing. Do we really need a bar exam for lawyers? But perhaps that's for somebody else to answer. I mean, I'm also politically here. If, again, who knows where we're going to be come the fall time, but politically, right now, I think if the election were held, I think there's a strong argument to be made that the Democrats, not just in Illinois, but nationwide, including on the federal level, can play the "I told you so" card pretty adeptly, given what the trends are. How closely are folks hearing? I think the pandemic obviously is going to be an election issue. How do you deal with that, given it's a fluid situation? If you're running a campaign, I'll open it up to anybody who wants to.
Well, I would say most of the time that I was active as a reporter, it was before the internet age, which really dates me. As you said, I am a senior citizen. And
an elder.
Thinking about it, had this pandemic occurred back when I was an active reporter, it would have been extremely difficult to maintain a campaign because so much of it was personal contact. Nowadays, however, with social media, there's not the same necessity to be able to get out and knock on doors and go, meet with your neighbors to talk about candidates as there was 30, 40 years ago. And as a matter of fact, I suspect that this coming election will see the greatest use of social media, not just the standard stuff like Facebook and Twitter, but some of the newly developing things like, say, TikTok. And I suppose this dates me because maybe that's passe now too. But we're going to see a lot more of that and a lot less of in-person, door-to-door campaigning. As a matter of fact, I suspect a lot of people, if someone came up, knocked on the door, they take a look. If they didn't know the person, they wouldn't even bother opening the door because of their concern. I know in my case, I sure wouldn't.
Sure. And I think adding to that potentially is we are facing the prospect of a mail-in election like we've never had before in Illinois. And there's 3 states that have mail-only elections and have had for a number of years. That would be Washington State, Oregon, and Colorado. Here in Illinois, we've never had one that has the potential to have so many folks not show up at the polls. They're supposed to get their ballots, I believe, the first week of October, which leaves them a month to put them in. How do you do an 11th hour hit piece in an atmosphere like this?
I think
Yeah, sure.
Makes it a lot harder, I think, having so much less time to do the oppo research. And like Charlie was saying, this is, I think, going to be campaigns that will be held on social media and Facebook Live and other similar platforms, because there won't be the same opportunity to campaign in person.
And I think another thing that campaigns will have to take into account is that the number of people who are going to be voting absentee or voting by mail, I say absentee because that, again, is my generation. I've voted in person every election since I was back from the Peace Corps in Panama, where I voted absentee. until this last primary, where I voted by mail because I did not want to show up at the polling place.
Mhm.
And so people are going to be, as Sarah said, you can apply for your send in your application for a ballot. I think right now you can do it if you want. You'll get your ballot, say October 1st. That's a month before the election. A lot of people will be making their decisions and sending in their ballot long before the kind of traditional final week wrap up and last
Right.
weekend rallies and all the rest of that. So as a campaign, you have to kind of focus your attention over a longer time span with the greater intensity. And the flip side of it is for those in the media, and I guess I could still consider myself a reporter, how are we going to report on election night when here in Illinois, if your ballot is postmarked by election day, which I believe is November 3rd,
Yeah.
and then it can be delivered up to 2 weeks later. And so you're going to, in races that are very close, you're not going to know who the winner is conceivably for, any number of days, instead of the situation where the wire services can call a race sometimes instantaneously as soon as the polls are closed. Now, I suspect in Illinois, the AP will call Illinois for Joe Biden like 1 second after 7 o'clock.
No, I think they did that last week, but go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, no, fair enough. Go on. I interrupted you.
No. And so I was saying it's going to be unlike any election that any of us have ever known, because of the long drawn out period, because of the uncertainty about voting, and because of the length of time it may take to count the ballots, which could leave us undecided or unknowing about any number of races that would be close. For example, here in central Illinois, we have Representative Rodney Davis, Congressman Rodney Davis, being challenged again by Betsy Dirksen Londrigan. That was a fraction of a point separating them last time out. And if the race this time is as close as it was last time, we may not know the winner for days until days after the election.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you're the strategist, when do you do the quote unquote peak? I.e., you can't, it's no longer possible, I would imagine, okay, we'll put something out really horrible about the candidate and some terrible thing that he or she may or may not have done back in junior high school, and we'll put that out the Friday or the Saturday before election day. That might not work anymore, and is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, when you said that, I was thinking to myself, recalling some of those. Yeah, that would not be a bad thing. As a matter of fact, at the Sun-Times and other newspapers, we kind of had a rule that if somebody dumped something really scurrilous the weekend before the election, we would sit on it until after the election.
Right. It's a different day and age. I mean, I remember those days too. There was a no letters to the editor on an election. I think Thursday was the cutoff. And if it was anything later than that, boy, there'd better be a video and a ton of affidavits and a signed confession. Candidate. So I wonder, could this lead us? Is there a flip side to this? Could this perhaps, if we can't do those 11th hour hit pieces anymore, might we have better elections, a better dialogue, a better, and the Davis Londrigan race, for example, might we be seeing a better exploration of the issues that really matter than we would see if it was a different year?
I would say, and maybe this sounds pessimistic, but I would say not likely. We'll just start with the hit pieces sooner.
Yeah.
And on some of the stuff's been going on social media already. Attack ads, and for all the disdain that people say they have for attack ads, strategists will say, yeah, but they work, which is why we do
they
it.
work.
And if people would stop paying attention to them, then we wouldn't do it. If people would clamor to know, well, what are the issues? Where do you stand on this, that, or the other thing? That's what we would give them. But when they react to the nastiest thing we can say about the opponent, that's what we're going to do, because it's all about winning.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're already almost to July, and I don't know that we've seen any kind of a race heat up. Nobody really pays attention to this sort of thing generally until after Labor Day anyway,
Yeah.
unless it's a gubernatorial race, and then you get something like Ronner, and at that level, it almost never stops. It's just continual. So let's hope it maybe doesn't get continually nastier than perhaps it already is. I mean, on a campaign level, flipping back to you used to kiss babies and press flesh at rallies. How important was that as time has gone on? The state fair, for example, now canceled. The importance of that, I think, has been dialed back a bit in recent years in terms of its importance to the parties. Is this just a bigger death knell to this, Sarah, or Charlie? Anybody? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I would say that if you're in this environment, if you're a campaign, you go out and kiss somebody's baby, they'd have you arrested for assault.
Well, perhaps not in Louisville, Illinois, but I digress. The hometown of a certain senator or legislator who doesn't like some of the stay-at-home orders. I want to switch gears here to something I've been thinking about the last few days, and this has to do with how we honor historical figures, not just here in Illinois, but nationwide. In Edwardsville, for example, there's a movement now to get rid of a statue of Ninian Edwards, who was the third governor of our state, because it was a slave owner. And this is, of course, in Edwardsville, the namesake of that governor. And there's calls for reform. And that got me to thinking about the statues that here in Springfield we see almost on a daily basis at the Capitol. We have some ones that I think are probably, at least in my opinion, and I think a lot of people's opinions, it's due for some change. The one that I think of most is Pierre Menard, the statue where he's trading with the Native American who is kneeling. I think it's, in my view at least, a pretty disgraceful thing. I don't know how other folks might feel about that. There aren't many statues to African Americans on the state capitol campus. There's nothing for Barack Obama, for example. But we have Stephen Douglas, who occupies a real place of honor almost, and the little giant. And I've heard some scuttlebutt on the internet, and it being the internet, of, maybe that's not. Stephen Douglas said that slavery was an issue for states to decide. I didn't really regard it as a moral imperative. Across the street, we have, I would characterize it as somewhat diminutive statue of Martin Luther King Jr., who isn't from Illinois. Visited here, I believe, once in 1965. No knock on Martin Luther King Jr., but we don't have anything for Barack Obama. Martin Luther King Jr. isn't even, quote unquote, allowed on the Capitol grounds. He's in a public thoroughfare or sidewalk across the street, almost looking up, as if, you could interpret it a lot of ways. Jesse White, I interviewed him a number of years ago in 2008, and he's very much against that statue. And he knew Martin Luther King, went to college with him, and said that statue is not a good one. Is this a conversation worth having? And if it is, why haven't we had it yet? What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation worth having. I think it's interesting that there are no individual or specific women, statues to specific women on the Capitol grounds. There's like a memorial to either like police or firefighters that may feature a woman, but all of the statues are men. And Stephen Douglas has another statue inside the Capitol, in addition to he gets two at least. And so I wanted to mention that in this past legislative session, Representative Carol Ammons introduced a bill to create what's called the Women's Tribute Statue Commission. and it would have commissioned statues for Rosa Parks and Judy Bartopinka on the Capitol grounds. I believe that bill is stuck in a committee, so I don't. And she filed that the beginning of the year, beginning of 2020. So I don't know if that's going anywhere, but I think it would be interesting to have a conversation about the lack of female statues. Obviously, there's the woman welcoming people when they walk inside the Capitol, but it's an anonymous woman, not.
Well, is it the only woman who's in the rotunda? Is it Lottie Holman O'Neill, the only one?
Yeah, I would believe you, Charlie. I can't verify.
Yeah, I'm trying to visualize. I've not been there, well, since well before the pandemic. I would suspect one of the reasons that Barack Obama doesn't have a statue yet is because he's still living.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, how many of the statues that are around there are of people who are still living? Not any of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good point, I think, because cross fingers and bless his heart, we have no reason to believe otherwise. But sometimes folks who are still living might do things while they're still living that might. And I'm not accusing Barack Obama, but we've seen things go sideways.
Oh no, that's part of honoring someone when they've died. We
Right.
don't have big memorials for people while they're still alive.
Correct. Yeah. And
I think there's also a picture of Douglas hanging in the Illinois House chamber on the Democratic side of the aisle. On the Republican side of the aisle, it's Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
I always figured the reason they were up there is because of the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates.
Well, I think that Sarah's point is well taken about women. It's not like Illinois lacks women who don't deserve honoring. I probably mangled my sentence here, but Jane Addams, for example.
Yeah.
She's not just a nationwide figure, a worldwide figure, and she's from Illinois, and there's nothing. It is a conglomeration. I'll be truthful. I'm not much a fan. I think of them as oversized lawn gnomes and not well executed, and they tend to be white men. Some of them aren't even specific figures. There's a monument to coal miners or firefighters. Not that coal mining isn't important. Not that putting out fires isn't important. Not that police officers aren't important. But we have nothing, for example, for Elijah Lovejoy. And that is another internationally famous figure who was killed by a mob in 1837 because of his abolitionist viewpoints. And, I have a soft spot for him in part because he ran a newspaper and he refused to shut it down, even though they kept throwing his printing press in the river, in the Mississippi River. Where is his thing in the Capitol? Why do we have, again, no knock on police officers, we have not one but two monuments to police officers in Springfield, one on the Capitol campus, another next to Illinois State Police headquarters. When are folks like Elijah Lovejoy? And you could also go to, we've had three you look at presidents that have come from the state of Illinois. Ronald Reagan grew up here. No statue to him. Ulysses S. Grant, when he was really hurting for money and was living in Missouri, he freed his slave, when he could least afford to do so because he felt it was apparently the morals of it were more important than the economics. And he rose to become president. Now, he had a flawed presidency, but you can look at a lot of folks that are in the state capitol who are honored. Think, what, that person wasn't exactly, it's George Ryan, for example. Ulysses S. Grant never went to prison. So I do think it's a conversation worth having, and I hope we do.
Well, and part of the explanation, I would say, is just history. I can't recall any of those statues to individuals, with the exception of maybe Everett Dirksen's, that were put up within the last 40, 50 years. Now, the firefighters were, but that was kind of generic.
Right. Yeah.
And the statues were put up by the people who were in charge at the time, who all happened to be white men. We've not had a female governor yet.
Yep.
And we only had a black governor for a matter of, I think, a few hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Through a kind of a constitutional provision that no longer exists.
Yeah.
So it was a reflection of the times. I think going forward, those are the things that we should be looking at as a state and as state leadership. We should be looking at, for example, having something for Jane Addams, having some commemoration for some of the Native American leaders who helped
Sure.
white settlers get established here in Illinois, some of the
Yeah.
black leaders that we've had over time.
Yeah, yeah. I believe we were on, in fact, if memory serves, at least part of Illinois was on the Trail of Tears. I could be mistaken about that, or at least some tribes from Illinois were put on the Trail of Tears. I'd love to continue the discussion. Unfortunately, we're out of time. And so thanks for the both of you to join us this week, and we'll see everybody else next week on Capitol View.